Blood spattered across the sidewalk as the metal prosthetic connected with the mugger's jaw, the sickening crack echoing down the Brooklyn street. Walter Roy hadn't moved that fast in 15 years. The young thug crumpled to the pavement, his eyes wide with shock, the stolen purse tumbling from his grip. No one had expected the 73-year-old man with the cane to become the most dangerous person on East 9th Street that afternoon. A teenager across the street lowered his smartphone, his mouth hanging open. "Holy shit," he whispered, already, tapping the upload button. "Grandpa just took his fucking leg off and beat a dude with it." Walter calmly wiped the blood from his titanium limb with a handkerchief, his weathered face betraying no emotion as the sirens began to wail in the distance. Autumn in Brooklyn had always been Walter Roy's favorite time of year. The scorching, summer heat finally relented, and a crisp breeze carried the scent of turning leaves through the narrow streets of his neighborhood. He had lived in the same modest brownstone for nearly 40 years, moving in shortly after returning from his final deployment. The locals knew him only as the quiet old veteran who walked slowly with his cane, who sat on his stoop on pleasant evenings and nodded politely to passers-by. Few knew about the silver star in his dresser drawer. Nobody knew about the other things, hidden throughout his home. At precisely 6:30 a.m., Walter awoke as he had every day since 1968, without an alarm, his internal clock permanently calibrated by military routine. He eased his wiry frame upright, wincing as the familiar phantom pain shot through a limb that hadn't been there for decades. His right leg ended just below the knee, the result of a helicopter extraction gone wrong in a jungle whose name most Americans couldn't pronounce. Walter massaged the tender skin around his stump, preparing it for the day's prosthesis. The VA had finally provided him with a newer model last year, lightweight carbon fiber with improved joint mobility. It was a far cry from the clunky apparatus he'd first been fitted with in the military hospital. Progress, he supposed, though. He sometimes missed the solid dependability of the older versions. The new one felt almost too light, like it might float away if he didn't concentrate. After a breakfast of black coffee and toast, the same meal he'd eaten for as long as he could. "Remember." Walter attached his prosthetic, pulled on a pair of loose-fitting khakis, and shrugged into a faded flannel shirt. He ran a comb through his silver hair, now thin but still military short, and appraised himself in the bathroom mirror. Another day above ground, he muttered to his reflection, a ritual affirmation that had sustained him through darker times. By 7:45 a.m., Walter had completed his morning route. 2 blocks to Morelli's for the newspaper, a brief stop at St. Mark's to light a candle for names he never spoke aloud, then slowly back home. The neighborhood was coming alive around him. Parents rushing children to school, shop owners raising metal shutters, the occasional delivery truck rumbling down narrow streets. Walter settled onto his porch with his coffee and newspaper, his cane hooked over the armrest of his chair. From this vantage point, he could observe much of the block while appearing to be nothing more than an old man enjoying the morning sun. It was a habit born of training that had never quite left him. Always be aware of your surroundings, always know your exits, always look for signs of something out of place. Mrs. Patel from next door waved as she hurried past with her granddaughter, in tow. Walter nodded in return, offering a small smile that softened his otherwise stern countenance. Children had always been able to coax genuine warmth from him, a fact that seemed to surprise people who only knew his taciturn public persona. "Good morning, Mr. Roy," the little girl called out. "Morning, Priya," he replied. "Big test today?" The child's eyes widened. "How did you remember?" Walter tapped his temple. "Old soldiers never forget the important things." Mrs. Patel beamed. "If only she prepared as diligently as you remember, Mr. Roy. We must hurry now. Have a blessed day." Walter watched them disappear around the corner, his smile fading as his eyes caught movement across the street. 3 young men loitered near the bodega, their postures too stiff, their attention too focused on the morning foot traffic. He recognized one of them, Tony Vega's youngest boy, who should have been in school instead of running with the 9th Street crew. Times changed, but some things remained constant. Every neighborhood had its predators. Walter had been watching them establish territory over the past few months. their graffiti tags spreading like an infection, their presence growing bolder as police patrols became increasingly sporadic. Walter sipped his coffee and turned a page in his newspaper, his attention never fully leaving the young men across the street. They were waiting for something. Or someone. That kind of patience usually meant trouble. He considered calling his contact at the precinct. Captain Reyes still owed him for that business back in '98, but decided against it. Better to watch and wait. Intervention without adequate intelligence was how missions went sideways. By mid-afternoon, Walter had completed his daily exercises, modified push-ups and stretches that kept his 73-year-old frame more limber than most men 20 years his junior, eaten a sparse lunch, and was preparing for his second outing of the day. The hardware store on Flatbush needed restocking, and Morelli had mentioned having some imported Italian coffee beans Walter might appreciate. He changed into a clean button-down shirt, adjusted his prosthetic limb, and grabbed his cane. The leg was behaving today, minimal phantom pain, good calibration with his movements. Some days were harder than others. Weather changes, stress, memories, all could conspire to make the connection between flesh and machine feel alien and wrong. But today was a good day. Walter was halfway down his front steps when he heard the commotion. A woman's scream cut through the afternoon calm, followed by shouts and the sound of metal clattering on pavement. Walter's head snapped toward the noise, his body tensing with the involuntary readiness that decades of civilian life had never fully erased. Half a block down, a scene was unfolding with chaotic speed. A young woman was sprawled on the sidewalk, her groceries scattered around her. A teenage boy had been knocked from his bicycle, which lay twisted near a fire hydrant, and sprinting away from both was a lanky figure in a dark hoodie, clutching a purse to his chest as he darted between pedestrians. Walter assessed the situation with cold efficiency. The mugger was heading in his direction, clearly planning to cut through the alley beside Morelli's. Most of the bystanders had frozen in place, several with phones raised to capture the spectacle. A few good Samaritans were helping the woman to her feet and checking on the fallen cyclist. No one was pursuing the thief. Walter's hand tightened on his cane as he made a split-second calculation. The young man would pass within 10 feet of him in approximately 7 seconds, too far for the cane to be effective. Police response in this neighborhood averaged 12 minutes at best. Without hesitation, Walter set his cane against the railing and reached down to his right leg. With practiced movements, he disengaged the locking mechanism on his prosthetic and pulled it free, balancing perfectly on his remaining limb, as though he'd been waiting for this moment. The mugger didn't notice the elderly man until he was almost upon him, his attention focused on his escape route. When he finally registered Walter's presence, confusion flickered across his face. Just a harmless old man with one leg, easily bypassed. It was the last mistake he would make that day. As the thief swerved to pass him, Walter pivoted on his good leg with surprising grace and swung the prosthetic in a perfect arc. Years of combat training had taught him precisely where to strike for maximum impact with minimum force. The titanium and carbon fiber limb connected with the young man's jaw like a baseball bat, the crack audible even over the street noise. Blood spattered across the sidewalk as the metal prosthetic connected with the mugger's jaw, the sickening crack echoing down the Brooklyn street. Walter hadn't moved that fast in 15 years. The young thug crumpled to the pavement, his eyes wide with shock, the stolen purse tumbling from his grip. No one had expected the 73-year-old man with the cane to become the most dangerous person on East 9th Street that afternoon. Teenager across the street lowered his smartphone, his mouth hanging open. "Holy shit," he whispered, already tapping the upload button. "Grandpa just took his fucking leg off and beat a dude with it." Walter calmly wiped the blood from his titanium limb with a handkerchief, his weathered face betraying no emotion as the sirens began to wail in the distance. The next 48 hours unfolded with bewildering speed. The security camera footage from Morelli's deli, combined with at least a dozen smartphone videos, ensured that Walter's intervention went viral before the police had even finished taking statements. By nightfall, local news vans were double parked along East 9th Street. By morning, national outlets were running the story with headlines like, One-legged wonder, veteran takes down thief with prosthetic justice, and greatest generation still kicking, literally. Walter endured the attention with stoic resignation. He answered police questions with terse precision, declined interviews with practiced politeness, and retreated into his home as the media circus intensified. Captain Reyes had personally come by to check on him, ostensibly to follow up on the incident report, but really to marvel at his old friend's sudden celebrity. "You're a goddamn internet sensation, Walt," Reyes said, shaking his head as he accepted a cup of black coffee in Walter's sparse living room. 3 million views and counting. They're calling you Prosthetic Avenger on Twitter." Walter grunted, unimpressed. "Stupid name. Could be worse. The post is going with Hopping Mad Veteran." "Jesus Christ." Reyes chuckled. "You know they're going to come at you with talk show offers, right? Good Morning America already called the precinct trying to get your contact information." Walter's expression darkened. "I'm not interested in being anybody's dancing monkey. I did what needed doing, that's all." "What you did was assault a 19-year-old with a deadly weapon, technically speaking," Reyes pointed out. "Fortunately, for you, the DA is calling it justified self-defense on behalf of others. Plus, the kid had 3 outstanding warrants, so nobody's crying for him." Walter nodded absently, his attention drawn to the window where another news van was pulling up. "There's something you should know, Walt," Reyes said, his voice dropping. "The kid you clocked, Kevin Diaz? He's Mateo Diaz's little brother." Walter's eyes snapped back to Reyes, suddenly alert. "Ninth Street crew?" "Yeah. Mateo runs the whole operation now. Drugs, protection, the works. He's been expanding territory for the past year, and we haven't been able to touch him. I'm telling you this because he won't take kindly to his brother being humiliated on national television," Walter finished. Reyes nodded grimly. "I can have a patrol car swing by more frequently, but they can't be here all the time," Walter said. "I understand the situation. You could stay with your daughter for a while, let things cool down." Walter's expression hardened. "I haven't spoken to Elaine in 7 years, and I'm not running from street thugs, Mike. I've faced worse." Reyes sighed, knowing better than to argue. "Just watch your back, all right? These aren't jungle fighters or Soviet-trained operatives. These are unpredictable kids with guns and grudges who think they're immortal." After Reyes left, Walter methodically toured his home, mentally cataloging entry points and vulnerabilities. The brownstone was old but solid, with reinforced locks. He'd installed himself years ago. The basement windows were already barred. The rear exit led to a small enclosed yard with an 8-foot fence, defensible but not impregnable. Nothing ever was. From beneath his bed, Walter retrieved a steel lockbox. The key was on a chain around his neck, worn beneath his shirt at all times. Inside lay a Beretta M9, not his service weapon, but identical to it, meticulously maintained despite not having been fired in years. Beside it rested 3 full magazines and a small leather case containing his silver star, Purple Heart, and a faded photograph of 5 young men in jungle fatigues, their arms around each other's shoulders, grins defiant in the face of what awaited them. Walter stared at the photo for a long moment, his weathered finger tracing the faces of ghosts. Then he carefully returned it to the case, loaded the Beretta, and placed it in the drawer of his bedside table. That night, he slept lightly, waking at the slightest noise. But no one came. By the second day, Walter's sudden fame had transformed the neighborhood. Teenagers lingered near his home hoping to catch a glimpse of the Prosthetic Avenger. Local businesses reported increased foot traffic as curiosity seekers wandered the area. Mrs. Patel and several other neighbors brought food, casseroles, pies, containers of homemade curry, expressing their gratitude for his intervention and concern for his welfare. Walter accepted their offerings with awkward thanks, uncomfortable with the attention but unwilling to be rude to people who meant well. The young woman whose purse he'd saved came by with flowers and tears in her eyes. The teenager whose bicycle had been damaged stopped by to shake his hand, calling him sir, with genuine respect that made Walter's throat tighten unexpectedly. Producer from a national morning show left her card, along with an edible arrangement and a note promising a substantial appearance fee if he would share his story. Walter tossed the card but kept the fruit. As evening approached, Walter sat on his porch, ostensibly reading but actually monitoring the street. He'd spotted two unfamiliar vehicles circling the block multiple times, a black SUV with tinted windows and a red Camaro with custom rims. Intelligence gathering, most likely. Establishing patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. Walter deliberately maintained his routine, but with subtle adjustments. He kept his cane closer, his movements more measured. To the casual observer, he appeared to be nothing more than an elderly man enjoying the evening air. Only someone with trained eyes would notice how he positioned himself to minimize exposure, how his gaze methodically swept the street at regular intervals, how he never fully relaxed. Just after sunset, his phone rang. His actual phone, not the burner he kept for emergencies. The caller ID displayed Elaine. Walter stared at it for 3 rings before finally answering. "Hello, Elaine." "Dad?" His daughter's voice was tight, controlled. "I saw you on the news. Didn't realize they were running the story in Seattle. It's everywhere, Dad. Our prosthetic justice is trending. There are memes." Walter sighed. "I'm fine. It wasn't a big deal. You assaulted someone with your prosthetic leg. That's definitely a big deal by normal people standards. He was mugging a woman and knocked down a kid. Someone needed to step in." A pause. That's actually why I'm calling. Mom would have been proud of you." The unexpected comment hung in the air between them, bridging a gulf that had widened since cancer took Margaret 4 years ago. Walter and Elaine had never known how to talk to each other without Margaret translating. "I appreciate that," Walter finally said. "Are you safe?" The news said it was gang-related. "I'm taking precautions." Another pause. "That's exactly what worries me. I know what your precautions look like, Dad. It's nothing I can't handle. That's what you always say until it isn't." Elaine's voice softened. "I could fly out, or you could come here for a while." "I'm not leaving my home, Elaine." "God, you're stubborn. Just be careful, okay? And maybe call me when this is over." "I will," Walter promised, meaning it more than he had expected to. After they hung up, Walter remained on the porch until full darkness settled over the neighborhood. The black SUV had made 3 more passes. The red Camaro was now parked 2 blocks down. They were getting bolder or more impatient. Walter went inside, secured his home, and prepared for bed. He placed the Beretta on his nightstand, within easy reach. As an afterthought, he retrieved the burner phone from its hiding place in a hollowed-out book on his shelf. The battery was still charged. He checked it monthly. Only 3 numbers were programmed into it. Walter stared at the device for a long moment before setting it beside the gun, just in case. That night they came. The pounding on his door jolted Walter from light sleep at 2:17 a.m. Not knuckles, something harder. Bats, probably, maybe gun butts. He was on his feet instantly, years of training overriding the protests of his aging body. He'd slept in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his prosthetic leg nearby but not attached. No time for that now. Walter grabbed the Beretta and the burner phone, then hopped silently to the window, keeping to the side as he peered out. 4 figures stood on his porch, bulky shapes in leather jackets. One had a baseball bat resting against his shoulder. Another was trying the doorknob. The streetlight illuminated enough of their faces for Walter to recognize 2 of them from Reyes's gang database, 9th Street crew enforcers. The others were new, but their affiliation was obvious. Walter weighed his options. He could call 911, but police response would take too long. He could barricade himself in and hope they gave up, but the look of determination on their faces suggested otherwise. He could confront them with the Beretta, but shooting 4 men on his porch, justified or not, would create complications he didn't need. Or he could open the door. Walter tucked the gun into his waistband at the small of his back, concealed by his loose t-shirt. He slipped the burner phone into his pocket. Then, balancing on his one leg, he made his way to the door just as the pounding resumed, more insistent this time. I hear you, he called out calmly. Give an old man a minute. He unlocked the door and pulled it open, deliberately off balance, leaning heavily against the wall. The perfect picture of vulnerability, an elderly amputee in pajamas awakened from sleep. The four men on his porch stared at him with varying expressions of menace and surprise. The leader, a muscular Latino man with a teardrop tattoo beside, his left eye stepped forward. Mateo Diaz, Walter said, recognition dawning. I was wondering when you'd stop by. Diaz's eyes narrowed. You know who I am. I make it a point to know who's who in my neighborhood. Then you know why we're here, old man. Walter nodded. Your brother made some poor choices. So did I, apparently. You humiliated my family, Diaz snarled. Made us a laughingstock. You know what that means in my business? Loss of respect, loss of authority, potentially loss of territory to rivals who smell weakness. Walter replied matter-of-factly. I understand organizational dynamics better than you might think, Mr. Diaz. The calm analysis seemed to throw Diaz off balance momentarily. He recovered quickly, face hardening. We're not here to talk, viejo. We're here to send a message. Walter sighed, a gesture of resignation. I figured as much. May I put on my prosthetic? First? It would be undignified to take a beating while hopping around. The request was so unexpected, so bizarrely reasonable, that Diaz found himself nodding before he'd fully processed it. Walter turned slightly, reaching for his prosthetic leg that rested against a nearby chair. As he did so, his hand brushed against his lower back, feeling the reassuring solidity of the Beretta's grip. He could draw now, end this confrontation with lethal efficiency. 4 targets at close range, it would be over in seconds. But some endings created more problems than they solved. And Walter Roy had always been a strategic thinker. Instead, he attached his prosthetic with practiced movements, not rushing despite the tension vibrating in the air. When he straightened, he looked Diaz directly in the eyes. I won't fight back, he said quietly. But I need you to understand something, Mr. Diaz. This isn't personal for me. Your brother was committing a crime. I intervened, that's all. It became personal when you broke his jaw with your fake leg on national TV, one of the other men growled. Walter shrugged. Fair enough. Without warning, the man with the baseball bat stepped forward and swung, connecting with Walter's ribs. Pain exploded through his side, but Walter had been anticipating the blow. He allowed himself to fall back against the wall, slipping his hand into his pocket in the process. The burner phone was small, ancient by modern standards. His fingers found the keys by memory, 3 specific numbers programmed decades ago. As another blow landed, this time to his shoulder, Walter pressed them in sequence. What you got there, old man? Demanded one of the attackers, noticing the movement. Walter allowed a small, bloody smile to cross his face. Calling an old work number. Diaz reached down and snatched the phone from Walter's hand. He stared at the ancient device with its tiny, screen showing only, call connected. What the fuck is this? Diaz demanded, confusion evident. Insurance policy, Walter replied, spitting blood onto his own floor. Activated about 30 seconds ago. Diaz laughed, tossing the phone aside. Your 911 call won't help you. We'll be long gone before any cops show up. Walter's smile widened slightly despite the pain. Not calling 911. Then who? You asked about my old work, Walter interrupted, his voice suddenly stronger, more commanding. Did you bother to research who you were dealing with before you came here tonight? The uncertainty that flickered across Diaz's face suggested he hadn't. Walter Roy, Master Sergeant, 5th Special Forces Group, Green Beret, 3 tours in Vietnam, later assignments, classified. Walter's eyes had changed, the kindly grandfather vanishing beneath something colder, harder. I've been retired a long time, but some connections never expire. One of the men shifted uncomfortably. He's bluffing. He's just an old man. Maybe, Walter conceded, but in approximately 7 minutes we'll know for sure. The confidence in his voice gave Diaz pause. He glanced at the burner phone on the floor, then back at Walter's bloodied face. You're stalling, he decided finally. Trying to save yourself with bullshit war stories. Walter shook his head slowly. Not stalling, Mr. Diaz. Just giving you context for what happens next, a courtesy. Something in Walter's demeanor, the absence of fear, the calm certainty in his eyes, planted a seed of doubt in Diaz's mind. He checked his watch impulsively. Expecting something, Mateo? Walter asked softly. Before Diaz could respond, a distant sound penetrated the tense silence, the rhythmic thudding of helicopter rotors growing steadily louder. The four men exchanged glances. One moved to the window, peering out into the night. "There's choppers coming," he reported, voice tight with sudden anxiety. "Two of them." "Probably police," Diaz said, but his confidence was visibly eroding. "We need to wrap this up and go." Walter leaned against the wall, one hand pressed to his injured ribs. "Those aren't police helicopters, Mr. Diaz. NYPD doesn't fly Blackhawks." As if on cue, brilliant searchlights suddenly illuminated the street outside, bathing everything in harsh white light. The thunder of rotors was deafening now as two military helicopters hovered low over the neighborhood. Diaz rushed to the window, his face pale. "What the fuck did you do, old man?" The street below had erupted into chaos. Neighbors were emerging from their homes, staring upward in shock and confusion. And descending from one of the helicopters on fast ropes were dark figures, at least 8 of them, moving with precision that spoke of extensive training. "Remember when I mentioned classified assignments?" Walter said, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "Some connections never expire." The 4 gang members were frozen in place, watching as the tactical team assembled on the street with terrifying efficiency. Their black uniforms bore no identifying markings, except for a single insignia visible on one operator's sleeve. "A Silver Lightning Bolt. Who the fuck are they?" one of the men whispered. "The kind of people you don't want to meet professionally," Walter replied. "Fortunately for you, they're just here to deliver a message." The front door, still partially open, suddenly slammed fully back against the wall as a black-clad figure filled the entrance. The operator wore a tactical helmet with night vision goggles flipped up, revealing only eyes and a face otherwise concealed by a balaclava. The suppressed weapon in his hands was trained with unwavering steadiness on Diaz. "Master Sergeant Roy," the figure said, voice crisp and professional. "Package is secure. Extraction team standing by." Walter straightened slowly, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Appreciate the prompt response, but extraction won't be necessary." "Understood, sir." The operator didn't lower his weapon or take his eyes off the 4 gang members. "Alternative directive?" Walter considered the terrified men before him. "Mr. Diaz and his associates were just leaving. They've delivered their message and now, they understand mine." The operator nodded once, stepping aside to clear the doorway. "You heard the Master Sergeant, gentlemen. Time to go." For a moment, no one moved. Then Diaz, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, edged toward the door. His companions followed, weapons forgotten, eyes darting between Walter and the armed operator. "This isn't over," Diaz muttered as he passed Walter, a feeble attempt to save face. Walter's response was quiet enough that only Diaz could hear it. "It absolutely is, son. Because next time, I won't call first." As the gang members stumbled out onto the porch, they found themselves surrounded by the tactical team, weapons trained, expressions hidden behind professional masks. The operators formed a corridor leading away from Walter's home, a clear path to follow. Diaz and his men practically ran down the street, not looking back as the helicopters maintained position overhead, searchlights tracking their retreat until they disappeared around a corner. The tactical team leader stepped into Walter's home. "Medic." Walter shook his head. "Nothing serious. Bruised ribs, maybe cracked. I've had worse." The operator nodded, then reached up and removed his helmet and balaclava, revealing a face much younger than Walter had expected. Mid-30s, perhaps, with sharp features and the unmistakable intensity of someone who lived in the world of high-risk operations. "Commander Jackson, sir. Delta. The general sends his regards." Walter's eyebrows rose slightly. "Jameson is still breathing? Stubborn old bastard." Jackson's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Says, "The same about you, sir." He wanted to come himself when the alert came through, but protocol wouldn't allow it. That alert system was established 40 years ago, Walter said, shaking his head in disbelief. Never thought it would actually work. The general maintains certain legacy systems personally. Says they're more reliable than the new digital networks. Been proved right more than once. Jackson glanced around the modest home. Will you be safe here, sir? We can arrange protection or relocation. Walter lowered himself carefully into a chair. I'll be fine, Commander. Our friends won't be back, and neither will anyone else once word gets around. Jackson nodded. As you wish, sir. Medical team can still... Not necessary, Walter interrupted firmly. Just doing your job was enough. More than enough. It was an honor, Master Sergeant. Your reputation precedes you. Walter looked up sharply. What exactly do they teach you youngsters about dinosaurs like me? For the first time, Jackson's professional demeanor cracked with a genuine smile. Let's just say Operation Thunderclap is still required reading at the farm. Walter closed his eyes briefly. God help us all. Within minutes, the tactical team had disappeared as swiftly as they had arrived, melting back into the night. The helicopters departed, leaving the neighborhood in a state of confused excitement as residents gathered on the street speculating wildly about what they had just witnessed. By morning, social media would be ablaze with theories and grainy videos. News crews would return in force. Police would officially claim ignorance while unofficially spreading rumors about federal operations and national security. Walter Roy's viral fame would transform into something approaching urban legend status. None of it would matter to Walter. What mattered was that he had sent his own message, not just to Mateo Diaz and the 9th Street crew, but to anyone else who might consider his age or disability a sign of vulnerability. As the last sounds of the helicopters faded into the distance, Walter reached for his phone, his regular phone, and dialed a number he hadn't called in too long. Dad? Elaine's voice was thick with sleep. It's 3 a.m. Are you okay? I'm fine, Walter said, suddenly feeling every one of his 73 years. Just thought I'd take you up on that visit offer, if it still stands. Of course, it does, she said, immediately more alert. What happened? Walter smiled slightly, looking around his modest home with its hidden histories and secret connections to a world most people never knew existed. Nothing important, he said, just thinking it might be time for a change of scenery. What Walter didn't tell his daughter, what he would never tell anyone, was the truth about that night. There had been no special forces team on standby, no general maintaining 40-year-old alert systems. The burner phone he'd activated wasn't connected to any clandestine network. It had been dead for years, its battery long since failed, its circuitry corroded beyond function. The unmarked helicopters had been a coincidence, part of a scheduled training exercise for a counter-terrorism unit based out of Fort Hamilton that Walter had read about in the military section of his newspaper days earlier. Commander Jackson was actually Lieutenant Kevin Winters, an old friend's son who recognized Walter from family stories and had improvised brilliantly when he spotted the situation unfolding below during their nighttime maneuver. Sometimes, Walter had learned long ago, perception was more powerful than reality. And sometimes the most effective weapon in your arsenal was the legend you never tried to create.